Welcome to a special edition of Legal AF and All Rise News. Michael Popok, Adam Klasfeld, together again. Adam was this close to getting selected for jury duty, but now he's back doing videos on a regular basis. It's always good to be on the inside of that room, Adam. And
Yeah.
so there's a couple of major stories that have come out that we wanted to talk about. One in the world of immigration and due process, a case that you and I both worried about when it moved from Judge Suknanen, who over Labor Day weekend certified a putative class, entered a temporary restraining order in the middle of the night, in the early wee hours of the morning, to make sure that 600 Guatemalan children who were unaccompanied, including without their lawyers, were thrown onto, taken out of their beds, literally woken up out of sleep, thrown onto planes at 1 a.m., with bogus notices being given to their attorneys, requiring a lawsuit to be filed. They are part of a refugee resettlement program, meaning they can't go back to Guatemala because they'll be killed or worse. Right. Things are so bad in that part of Guatemala for these kids, their parents don't want them back and purposely sent them alone to America to be resettled. And so the parents were not thrilled when they heard the Trump administration saying, we're sending them back. It's a family reunification program. And so Judge Suknanen, over Labor Day weekend, and you and I covered it, shut that down with 15 to 16 orders every 2 hours. She was issuing orders to make sure planes didn't leave so that she would be divested of jurisdiction. And she was successful. And I was like, oh, Suknanen, I love Suknanen. She's great. She's an immigrant herself, right? She came from Trinidad and Tobago. She's an accomplished lawyer. She worked in the Department of Justice. She clerked for all the right people. This is the perfect judge. And then I find out she's the emergency duty judge. Right. And it gets reassigned to Judge Kelly, a Trump, I wouldn't call him a Trumper, but from the Trump's first term.
Right. And it's appointed by him.
Right. And so you take it from there. Kelly, after a hearing, issued a scathing decision against the Trump administration and against Drew Ensign, one of the lawyers we'll talk about in particular.
Right. It is a 43-page ruling. And he quotes the government saying that it's fairly outrageous that these attorneys bring the lawsuit against them because all the Trump administration wants to do, all they want to do is send these children back to their parents in Guatemala who want them. And what Judge Kelly said in his ruling was that crumbled like a house of cards. That's the key ruling for me. That's a key quote from this ruling because he just calls the Trump administration out so clearly there and says, you tried to hustle these children onto a plane in the dead of night over Labor Day weekend. And it was just before midnight that these lawyers received their notices. They had to file their lawsuit at 1 a.m.
By the way, it was at one point, it was a real page turner. He'd be a very good novelist.
Absolutely. Right. And Judge Kelly, as you mentioned, he's appointed by Trump in Trump's first term. During Trump's first term, he restored the press credentials of Jim Acosta. And so there was for anyone whose hearts went out to these unaccompanied children over Labor Day weekend when this story broke, I think that a lot of people, they had a kind of lump in their throats at the moment this was reassigned because it was clear that Suknanen wasn't going to take it. And then it had gone from what was perceived to be a favorable judge to an unfavorable judge. But this is a judge who was just calling the shots. And he said that the Trump administration's justification was a house of cards that crumbled. He cited a rather heartbreaking whistleblowers report submitted to his chambers by the plaintiffs, the lawyers for these children, talking about how some of the people who were rustled out of bed in the dead of night by the Trump administration trying to get loaded onto a plane before a judge stopped it, they were people who were suffering from trauma back home. They were abandoned by their parents, and that this was reigniting that trauma. So he quotes from that whistleblower's report and denounced what they did as a rushed, seemingly error-laden operation. I'm trying to see if I can pull up.
You look for that. But this federal judge, Judge Kelly, found that the Trump administration itself violated the laws about child trafficking In other words, the Trump administration violating its own U.S. policy and U.S. law about trafficking children, which would have required due process at every turn in order to take refugee classified children out of this country unaccompanied. All have been violated. And if anybody's wondering, the Office of Refugee Resettlement is under the Department of Health and Human Services. And we know who runs that. This is another RFK Jr. special.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Now, I have the quotation from the whistleblowers report, and you're right to point out the violation was to the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act. And the whistleblower report says, one child woken up at 2 a.m. on Labor Day Sunday, quote, experienced neglect and abandonment from his father growing up in Guatemala. Despite that history, a quote-unquote supervisor put him on a bus for the airport that morning. He was about to board the plane. Someone told him he was not on the list. A close call. Or consider, and the continues here, or consider another child seemingly slated for reunification who appears to share a similar history of neglect. His father is not part of his life, and the mother lacks resources to care for him and does not want him to return.
And there was other stories about children being subject to death threats in Guatemala when they reached the parents and said, you're bringing them back? The reason we sent them to America was to avoid being killed. So the data that came out, this is why Drew Enson's in so much trouble, in my view. Drew Ensign, who, in my view, lied to Judge Boasberg about the 200 people sent in the middle of the night on planes to El Salvador. Same guy who ultimately lied to Judge Zinnes related to Abrego Garcia is now lying to both Judge Zucnanen and Judge Kelly about, Judge, I don't know why we've been sued. This is all about repatriation. This is about family reunification. It's a heartwarming Hallmark story, Judge. And then what it turns out, and the judge pointed it out, is that out of the 606 people, children, first of all, they only had phone numbers for 204. Ensign looked the judge in the eye and said out loud in court in the first hearing that every one of the parents wanted these kids back. They only had phone numbers for a third. When they reached the people, they all universally said, bring them back. There's a reason we wanted them in the refugee program. Think about how bad things must be in that part of Guatemala, that parents would not only allow, but want to put their children into other homes, other lives in the United States, right? We're supposed to be spreading our wings to bring in the huddled masses. And Donald Trump decides in the middle of the night at 1 o'clock in the morning that he's going to put the kids to get away from federal jurisdiction and then gets caught. And this is all about the Trump administration getting caught in its own web. One last comment before I turn it back. Let me think what my last comment was going to be. This is why I'm glad I have an editor. Ultimately, this group of people are subject to and currently in a program called Office of Refugee Resettlement. Turns out, I don't know if you saw this reporting that came out, several hours after Judge Zucnanen effectively grounded the planes and required hourly reports from the Department of Justice about each and every one of the 75 or so kids that were already loaded onto the plane until everyone was present and accounted for. Did you see the reporting that within hours of that, in like the middle of the morning, there was a memo that was issued by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, a scathing memo to the providers, the ones that actually house them, telling them, you better follow our direct instructions when we give them to you and don't violate them. One read of that is we should have been able to get those plane doors closed and up and out of here and away from federal jurisdiction. And you providers, you screwed it up. You didn't follow our commands. It didn't say anything about following the commands of Judge Zucnanen, who had grounded those planes with her orders. But that memo leaked out.
Right. And to your point, Michael, that the comments that Drew Ensign made during that hearing, those are the very comments that Judge Kelly described as the house of cards that crumbled. And we've been talking about the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act. It's not just the name of the statute, the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act. According to that whistleblower report that I just read, some of the children have, quote, indicators of being a victim of child abuse, including death threats, gang violence, and human trafficking. So according to this whistleblower's report, the people who the Trump administration were these children, these Guatemalan children that they were going to load up on planes, trying to hustle them out in the dead of night on Labor Day weekend. Some of them were victims of gang violence from an administration that claims to be very concerned about gang violence, and human trafficking from the administration that's cozying up to Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yeah. And just to show you why Judge Suknanen and Judge Kelly are so hell-bent on making sure that their orders and jurisdiction isn't violated, just we have a compare and contrast, right? We've got a case involving Judge Chutkan, who had presided, for people to remember, had presided over Donald Trump's election interference case in the District of Columbia. And she had a case involving, because these cases are all over the place now, involving a group of Africans. And she wrote a heartbreaking decision, but one that turned on whether she had federal jurisdiction or not. Tell our audience about that.
Right. I mean, she found that because the children in these cases were hustled all the way off to Ghana, she didn't have jurisdiction, but she described the government's actions as, I believe the words were appalling. She said that she can't disappear. She said she was alarmed and dismayed by 5 migrants who were sent to Ghana. And it shows what could have happened in this case. I mean, Judge Kelly wrote right in his ruling that there was no evidence that, had this not been stopped, had those immigration attorneys at midnight, on the cusp of midnight, not gotten word from the government that this is going to happen, and that within an hour they don't have a federal lawsuit, and get in touch successfully with the emergency duty judge, who takes quick action, blocks it, and that order is respected. If that sequence of events didn't happen, there would have been the same situation as the Ghana situation. And I think that there's another takeaway from the Ghana situation. Judge Chutkan presided, of course, over Trump's criminal trial. She's someone who the administration constantly fearmongers about, constantly
leftist, Marxist.
Leftist, Marxist. And what does she do? She works within the scope and boundaries of her power. And here we have Judge Kelly, who's a Trump appointee on the federal district court level. And what does he do? He rules against and excoriates the administration for these actions in the dead of night.
He was nice to Drew Ensign, because Drew Ensign should have been called up on charges for having lied to yet another federal judge. He's also the subject of the whistleblower complaint that was filed by Erez Ruveni, who was fired by him, claiming that he was ordered to lie, and that Drew Ensign has lied in court about planes taking off. But this in particular, and yet he's not only does he still hold his job, it seems lying in federal court doesn't seem to be a badge of dishonor in the Trump Department of Justice. It gets you promoted. It gets you to. They have very few trial lawyers that are worth it anyway. So all these people kind of show up in all of these cases all around the country, and Drew Ensign being one of them. Let's switch gears and talk about Lisa Cook. You and I did a lot of reporting from day one about the allegations against Lisa Cook, or hiring a lawyer, the filing of the lawsuit, as being on the board of governors, one of 7. And just to make it clear, the reason Donald Trump is trying to go after and remove Lisa Cook as one of 7 on the board of governors is because 1 gets you 9. What I mean by that is he needs a majority vote on the Federal Open Markets Committee in order to take control of interest rates. He currently only has 3 of those votes. But if he gets Lisa Cook out and takes control of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors 4-3, he then goes about and has that group, the majority, fire the 12 presidents of the regional Federal Reserve banks, 5 of which rotate on to the Open Markets Committee. So if he gets rid of her, he goes from being in the minority by 3 to controlling 9 of the 12 votes that set interest rates. That's why he's so focused on Lisa Cook, despite all of the evidence that's come out, that she did nothing wrong related to her mortgages, and that others in Donald Trump's own cabinet, including the Treasury Secretary, did as much or worse.
Or Bill Pulte, for example.
Pulte's parents.
Pulte's parents, close relatives you have, I think. Right. And two of them have had these same two primary mortgages saying. I haven't seen his comments. Maybe he's commented on it, but he keeps going after Lisa Cook as though that report didn't exist, as if the Reuters reporting totally exonerating her.
Or ProPublica.
Yeah, ProPublica.
You've got 4 out of the 15 cabinet members have the same quote unquote issue as Lisa Cook, which is she may have checked the box for 2 primary residences, but the new reporting from Reuters is she also gave them all the written information that the Atlanta condo was going to be her second home or vacation home. Her main home was in Michigan, and she took the tax credit and the property tax credit in Michigan, unlike Bill Pulte's parents who committed property tax fraud. And the rest. So this, Gia Cobb, you and I covered the hearing, makes a good ruling as a trial judge, setting the record, finds on preliminary injunction that due process had been violated. I thought that was the strongest of the 2 points. Due process had been violated because, I don't know, a social media tweet and then you not tweeting back is not the equivalent of due process in a hearing. Right. She also found that that's not for cause, which is the required by the Supreme Court as recently as May in order to take somebody out of their chair on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. It goes up to the appellate court for the circuit, the appellate court for the D.C. Circuit, federal, and in a 2-1 decision a few days ago, right, they rule in Lisa Cobb's favor again on due process. They say she didn't get the due. We don't even have to get to the second part. She can prove the second part on cause, no cause. She didn't get due process. Right. And then we waited around, you and me. When are they going to file this emergency application? Are they going to let her sit on Wednesday and vote as part of the Federal Open Markets Committee on interest rates, which they did, and 11-1, actually 12-0 to lower rates, 11-1 to lower them by 1/4 point. But now, take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of points about that. This Supreme Court emergency application, one of the common threads in this entire litigation, we're not even getting to did she or didn't she. So we have all of this reporting showing that Lisa Cook has been wrongly accused by Bill Pulte at a federal housing agency. She's been wrongly accused by Donald Trump. And we have this fight over, did she get due process? Is it enough to say, well, I tweeted at you, you have to respond to it? 2 courts have said no, let's see what the Supreme Court says. But we have this allegation that's rapidly crumbling, ginning up this entire legal fight to be able to oust her from the Federal Reserve. Another point, the Wall Street Journal in their editorial board actually said yesterday, because the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates a little bit, they declared it's Donald Trump's Federal Reserve now. And they were bemoaning that. Wall Street Journal does not like Trump's attempts to interfere with the Federal Reserve and the independence of the Federal Reserve. And they're saying even this threat, even these legal actions, before anything is done, he's got a 0 for 2 batting record. It might be 0 for 3. But already the pressure is on in the Federal Reserve, and they're doing the action that he prefers. And they think that independence has been compromised. And that goes to Trump's incentive here, that he knows that if he intimidates, win or lose, he can chill independence.
Let me read what the Wall Street Journal wrote, because I liked it. They said, it may be that everything works out fine with Donald Trump's attack on the Federal Reserve and on the interest rate cut. Inflation drifts downward after a brief price bump from tariffs. The economy booms despite tariffs and a looming labor shortage. The housing market enters a new golden age, and financial markets gallop happily off into the artificial intelligence sunset. That's tongue fully in cheek. Yes. But, with an ominous but, if Mr. Trump is wrong, voters will notice sustained inflation and the lack of gains in real wages. Having staked so much on his political assault on the Fed, Mr. Trump owns the outcome now, for good or for ill. And a week before, they said, you can't keep blaming Joe Biden anymore. This is your economy. I'm not so sure that this is the second time I've had this debate with somebody on Legal AF. I'm not so sure Donald Trump's assault on Lisa Cook and on Jay Powell led to the rate cut. I don't think so at all. I think that the economic data led to all of the Fed deciding that they had to do something to course correct, or this economy, which is already kind of going over the cliff. I think it's just salvaging a terrible, terrible Trump economy. And I interpreted it a different way. When Stephen Mirren voted as only the one out of the 12 to rate cut higher, we need to double the rate cut. Don't do a quarter point, do a half a point. Plus, they're going to do 2 more before December. We're going to be below 4% on interest rates, which is not a great thing. It's actually an indictment of the weakness of the Trump economy. But when I said Mirren decided to double it, the only data he has, because he got sworn in on Tuesday before he voted on Wednesday, was not the Fed's internal economic data. It's the data he has, the insider data he has, because he also wears the hat as the chair of the White House Council on Economic Advisors. So he knows the economy is even worse than Donald Trump is admitting, and he needs to double his rate cut. That's another way to look at Stephen Mirren cheerleading for a huge, giant rate cut. And so
right.
11-1, they vote, well, 12-0, they voted for the rate cut. But I think it's the economic data. It's the jobs numbers, which are terrible. Manufacturing numbers, terrible. Consumer confidence numbers, terrible. Inflation up. Jobs down. It's just terrible. They could not go 6 more. They couldn't. This is the first rate cut in 2025. They couldn't go another period without addressing getting a little bit more cash into the market. But we'll have to see what the result of that is. And the Wall Street Journal's not hopeful.
Right. And, I'm not going to dispute any of that analysis. That sounds right. But I will say the fact that Trump is going to perceive of and try to sell it as a win. He's been wanting them to cut the interest rate no matter what the evidence shows, because he thinks it's good for him, and that kind of goes to the central thing, the tactic behind the intimidation, the tactic behind, I will say that you are, I will accuse and convict you on social media of this crime. And if you fight it and you win, I will appeal it. And if you win again, I will take it to the Supreme Court. And even then, if I lose at every level, well, I've accomplished my objective, showing that I can try to intimidate, and I will claim a victory if you act in any way that I can spin as a victory.
Yeah, and so 2 observations on that. One, they kept calling it, and then Katz has picked it up, not an alleged mortgage fraud. They called it an apparent mortgage fraud. That slipped into Katz's opinion, where he seemed to convict her from his perch on the Court of Appeals without having any evidence in the record of any of that. And then, of course, John Sauer, over and over again, beating a dead horse, kept calling it the apparent mortgage fraud, the apparent mortgage fraud. Just saying it so does not make it so, as we know.
Right.
In addition to that, you've got what I'm sure they did in terms of timing, as the Popok doctrine, right, for Trump, or the Trump doctrine, which is wait for a terrible news cycle and then file against somebody. New York Times, Wall Street Journal. If you plotted it on a graph, it's always time to something going horribly awry for Donald Trump. So they didn't get her out in time for the meeting on yesterday. So here's the timing issue. They're coming off a terrible royal visit, Kash Patel meltdown, the backlash from firing Jimmy Kimmel, and the assault on the First Amendment, which I think they obviously miscalculated on, and Epstein, including when they were in the royal visit. And so he needs something in his favor. And then Lisa Cook, of course, is able to vote on the interest rates. So they wait to see what Lisa Cook is going to do. Because maybe he wasn't 11-1, maybe he was closer. And they could say, oh, she voted. She shouldn't have voted. Why did she vote, Supreme Court? You can't let her ever vote again. Here she voted with the super majority. Everybody voted for the rate cut. But they wanted to see what she was going to do. Because if she it was no lose for them, right? She votes for the rate cut, they get the rate cut. It's a majority decision. She votes against it. They can say, oh, no, look at her. She hates the animists, the conduct. They got to get rid of her. So for them, it was like news cycle. Anything bad going on? Yes, file it against her because it's not an emergency application anymore. Adam, always a great time to be with you. We kicked around 2 major developments, one involving 600 refugee children that are now under the protection, at least for now, of Judge Kelly, a Trump appointee who had a scathing indictment of the Trump administration and their actions to try to avoid federal jurisdiction. And then we talked about Lisa Cook and the timing of the new emergency petition to the United States Supreme Court to try once again to get her removed as a Federal Reserve governor. And we're going to do some stuff on Substack Live as well, right?
Absolutely. Anytime.
All Rise News. You can't miss that. That's, you used to read and watch, read everything that Adam wrote. Now you get to watch him on video with his own playlist and sometimes joining me and doing duets here on the Legal AF YouTube channel. Take a minute, hit the free subscribe button, come over to the Substack for All Rise News and also for Legal AF. You'll find some things you're not going to find anywhere else on Substack. So subscribe to those 2 places as well. So until our next report, Adam Klasfeld and Michael Popok. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.